Order. We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister. During the course of the Prime Minister's meeting on Sunday with Senator Payman at the Lodge, was she spoken to in an aggressive or intimidatory manner?
Order. I've got some difficulties with that question because we need to ensure that it is under the standing orders and practice regarding conversations and party arrangements. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker.
Be able to rephrase that to ensure it's under the Prime Minister's.
I just go through the list on pages 553 and 554 of content of the exact nature that was part of that question as issues that go beyond what relates to the Minister's responsibilities.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, in relation to this matter, as you're well aware, the Prime Minister has made a number of statements both in the House and outside of the House in relation to Senator Payman, and it's in the context, obviously, of his public acknowledgement of a meeting on Sunday, and it's completely and utterly within order.
Look, to assist the House, and I think to get the question over the line, if the Manager can rephrase the question about media reports about the indication of a meeting that took place, rather than just simply a conversation that won't be within standing orders if it's just asked about a conversation. It's got to be directly related to a Minister or Prime Minister's responsibilities. So the Manager of the Opposition Business will get one more chance.
I refer to comments the Prime Minister has made in this place about Senator Payman and to media reports about a meeting held by the Prime Minister with Senator Payman at the Lodge. Was Senator Payman at that meeting spoken to in an aggressive or intimidating manner?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
The answer is no, Mr Speaker. And a short while ago I received a message from Senator Payman addressed to me. Thank you, dear Prime Minister. Thank you for your leadership. It has been an honour and privilege to serve in the Australian Labor Party, and it went on to indicate her resignation as a member of the ALP.
Give a call to the Member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government helping ease the pressure on Australians? What approaches has the government rejected because they push up prices?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question and for the work that she has done in being an outstanding representative for Chisholm. And I, at the last election, repeated a theme that would run through all of our policies, which is no one held back and no one left behind. And that's what drives this government in providing responsible cost of living relief, whilst also looking towards the future and aspiration of where our country can go with a future made in Australia. And both of those have received major advances this week. Of course, on Monday, a tax cut for every single taxpayer, not just some. Indeed, as well, a pay rise for 2.6 million workers on award wages. So you put those two things together and you get people earning more and keeping more of what they earn. In addition to that, $300 in power bill relief for every household, 2 weeks additional government-funded paid parental leave, and the freezing of the costs of PBS medicines. Now, this will make a real difference, I had a text message from someone before whose pay packet this week has gone up by $200. $200 as a result of what they've done.
Members on my left will cease interjecting immediately.
Apparently that's something that's a terrible thing for those opposite. Susanna, an aged care worker in South Australia, has also said, "This will help me out with the cost of living." Tanya, a 66-year-old disability support worker who doesn't want to retire till she pays off her mortgage and gets set. She's happy because now she'll be able to pay it off faster. The Leader of the Opposition, of course, has opposed all of these measures. They have had a couple of ideas lately, pushing up power prices with nuclear reactors, and this week their plan to nationalise, one would think, the supermarkets with pushing up grocery prices. Already, of course, trying to bury their nuclear idea like burying nuclear waste, like burying radioactive waste, Mr Speaker. The party of Menzies promising to build their own power stations and take over the supermarkets. The Leader of the Opposition's answer to everything seems to be make the taxpayer buy them. In January, of course, the Leader of the Opposition was calling for a boycott of Woolies. Now he wants to nationalise them. From boycott to buyout. That's what we've seen in a spirit of months. From bagging out Woolworths to unexpected item in the bagging area.
Order. The Prime Minister's time is concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, we've seen building approvals, commencements and completions at their lowest levels for decades. Yet in 2023, your government brought in over 547,000 people, with one new home needing to be built every 2 minutes to accommodate your immigration intake. Why is the government continuing to worsen Australia's housing crisis?
The Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting. Highly disorderly to interject before a minister or Prime Minister speaks. Order. Not having any interjections during this answer. The member was heard in silence, and so the Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for Deakin for his question, and I note that people including Susan Lloyd-Hurwitz, who's of course former Mirvac CEO and the chair of the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, has indicated that housing and rental affordability is a real problem which has been decades in the making, and that it's about supply. In the former government, the nation's housing ministers didn't meet in the last 5 years of the former government. They went 5 years without any contact whatsoever. We know in my home state, in New South Wales, the coalition were in office for 12 years. They sold off 7,600 public housing properties and they only built 4,500.
The Prime Minister will pause. Member for Deakin, you've been interjected non-stop during this answer. Non-stop. You've asked the question. I would have thought if you've asked a question, you'd be here for the answer. You're not going to be here for this remainder of this answer. You'll leave the chamber under 94A. If someone has asked a question, the least you can do is listen to the answer. You mightn't like the answer or mightn't agree with the answer, but if someone's asked the question and given the courtesy of silence, that same courtesy is going to apply to the Prime Minister and every other minister. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker. But now that opposition to public housing has gone national, with their opposition that they still maintain to the Housing Australia Future Fund, their opposition to build to rent, where they voted against the tax measures just last week, and their opposition to help to buy as well, even though the leader of the Queensland LNP, and I'll table to raise his profile a bit, David Crisafulli, I'm sure he'll appreciate it, the LNP had their conference in Queensland over the weekend. That's the one where nuclear is not allowed to be said in any word or any resolution. But David Crisafulli on housing.
The Prime Minister will pause. The order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. If anyone interjects on this point of order, they'll join the member for Deakin.
Just
yes, the member for
Speaker,
you have the call.
Yes. He wasn't asked about nuclear. He was asked about 547,000
resume your seat.
coming into the country.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister was asked about why is he continuing to worsen the housing crisis. He's obviously disagreeing with that. He was saying the word housing just as you were on your feet. He won't be able to talk about nuclear, but he will obviously be able to talk about housing, of what he was asked about. The Prime Minister has the call, and I'm not sure what the quote is, but I'll listen carefully to make sure it's relevant.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The headline, you don't even have to go to the quotes, is Boost to Buy. So we got Help to Buy in the Senate, and the Queensland LNP are going to have a program they'll go to the election on called Boost to Buy. And listen if this sounds familiar. LNP to close the deposit gap for 1,000 Queensland first home buyers with new shared equity program to offer a critical boost into home ownership.
Order.
Mr.
Members on my right.
said every Queenslander who dreamed of owning their home should have the chance to do so, which is why the LNP would offer a boost to buy. They've ripped off. They've just cut and pasted the Help to Buy plan that's currently stuck in the Senate that they're voting against. The Greens are voting against it, even though it's in the platform that they went to the last election. The hypocrisy of this coalition of the Liberal Party, the National Party and the Greens shows no end, Mr Speaker.
Give a call to the member for Macquarie.
You Speaker, my question's to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering cost of living relief and responsibly managing the economy? What economic approaches has the government ruled out?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Macquarie for championing the cause of 67,000 people in her local community who got a tax cut this week because of this Prime Minister and this Labor government. And it shows how focused we have been in the course of the last week on rolling out substantial and meaningful and responsible cost of living relief to ease the pressures that we know that people are under. And it's been an important week, Mr Speaker, when it comes to the economy. On Friday, we learned that we're on track to deliver the second surplus in 2 years, the first back-to-back surpluses in almost 2 decades, Mr Speaker. By Monday, we were rolling out cost of living relief in at least 5 different ways, and yesterday we introduced the legislation for a future made in Australia, Mr Speaker, and that's because our responsible economic management is all about relief, it is about repair and it's about reform. Relief when it comes to cost of living pressures, repair of the budget mess that we inherited from those opposite, and reform of our economy to modernise and maximise the opportunities coming at us in a world of global net zero transformation, Mr Speaker. And it laid bare the choice, I think, the last week between us and them, Mr Speaker. Cost of living relief from Labor, opposed by those opposite. Renewables from Labor, reactors from those opposite, Mr Speaker. A future made in Australia or another decade of delay and denial, Mr Speaker. Responsible economic management or the kind of nuclear negativity and angry incompetence that we hear from those opposite, Mr Speaker. They wouldn't know the first thing about responsible economic management. On Tuesday, the Shadow Treasurer was calling tax cuts handouts that would make things worse after they voted for them. On Monday, he said Australians have had 5 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, when Australia hasn't had a negative quarter since he was a minister in the Morrison government. Last week, he said core inflation was going down in Canada the day after new data showed it was going up. That was the same week he got rolled on reinstating Stage 3. Last month he was rolled on public subsidies for nuclear reactors. In the same month he said they supported tax breaks for small businesses all along after they voted against them in the Senate. The year before he said they supported energy bill relief all along, but they voted against it in both houses. In May he couldn't explain his party's migration numbers. Around that time he said he supported people using their super for every investment that's available, which prompted another Shadow Minister to say that's not our policy. In April he said it's not the Reserve Bank's job to fight inflation, Mr Speaker. Is it any wonder that the opposition leader's most memorable grab of this parliamentary session was when he reassured the readers of the Sydney Morning Herald, and I quote, "Angus is not incompetent." Mr Speaker, I beg to differ.
Order. Members on my right, and before I call the member for Mackellar, I have a number of acknowledgements I'd like to do, just as we have done every day this week. Today we said farewell to the councillors and mayors that have been visiting us all week. Welcome to all of those joining us today. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are representatives from Hepatitis Australia and members of the hepatitis community. They are visiting Parliament House today on the occasion of their event being held for World Hepatitis Day, observed on the 20th of July. In the gallery today is Colonel Christopher Miller, the former acting United States Secretary of Defence, and 3 state ministers, Jacqueline Symes, the Attorney-General of Victoria, Jodie Harrison, a minister in the New South Wales Government, and Yvette D'Arth, a former member of this place and the Queensland Attorney-General. And finally, we have Mr Michael Bohm, AO, a former member for Macarthur, a former senator for New South Wales and a former Australian Consul General in New York, with his grandchildren. Welcome. And I give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, climate risk is worsening the cost of living, with dire consequences to communities on insurance and housing. They will be essentially unmortgageable if they are uninsurable. Methane heats up the atmosphere by some 80 times more than CO2. The government has now missed its statutory deadline to respond to the Climate Change Authority's recommendation to fix methane reporting. When will the government properly mitigate climate risk with methane reporting and a strong 2035 target?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question, and I acknowledge her interest. I also acknowledge that 82,000 of her constituents are receiving a tax cut this week, Mr Speaker, which I know everyone would support. In relation to the honourable member's question, I also acknowledge her engagement with me on this. As she is aware, I have referred to the Climate Change Authority advice on better methane reporting. I requested that advice as part of our general check-up on reporting, including under the NGES scheme. It is appropriate and important that we properly capture methane emissions and report them appropriately and in accordance with our international obligations. That is right. It is also right that it is a scientifically complicated issue and that there are different views about the way to capture those emissions. There are contested views, and I've taken the time to work those issues through very carefully, to consider the arguments that are before me. My consideration of those measures is very advanced, and I will be making announcements shortly.
Give the call to the honourable member for Hawke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government providing cost of living relief, including through lower energy bills? What policies have the government rejected and why?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for the question, and as a Victorian he would know that as of this week, with the $300 energy bill relief from the Albanese government and the impact of the Victorian market offer, we are seeing Victorian energy bills on average come down 23% for households and 15% for small businesses, Mr Speaker. That is how you deliver cost of living relief. Concrete measures now, not fantasy nuclear reactors in 20 years' time. Now, the honourable member asked me how this is different to other approaches. Well, it's different because it reduces prices, not increases them. It's different because it actually cuts prices, not increases them. And this week we've seen more policy from the opposition which push prices up. They want to rip up renewable contracts and they want to break up supermarkets. And ripping up renewable contracts puts energy prices up, and breaking up supermarkets puts grocery bills up. We saw this morning the headline in the Australian Financial Review. Former competition regulator Graham Samuel has savaged Peter Dutton's plan to break up supermarket giants, warning it could push up grocery prices for households, Mr Speaker. Warning it could push up grocery prices. We know energy prices have gone up between $200 and $1,000, and now they're trying to put grocery prices up as well. And it's not just the direct impact. There's also the impact on taxpayers, Mr Speaker, because the opposition is creating not one but two new government organisations to run their nuclear policy, and would put hundreds of billions of dollars at the expense of taxpayers and add it to public debt. Now, the Shadow Treasurer a couple of weeks ago said he's not having any subsidies on his watch. He's dead against subsidies. None. And then he was asked about this policy. He said, "Don't worry about it, it's all off budget." Now, that makes it okay, Mr. Speaker. But just a month, on the 5th of June this year, almost exactly a month ago, the Shadow Treasurer had a different view about off-budget spending. He was talking about off-budget spending, and he said, "Billions of dollars of off-budget funds are causing higher inflation, higher interest rates and higher taxes." Mr. Speaker, 45 billion off budget is terrible, but 600 billion off budget is hunky-dory. Just hunky-dory, according to the Shadow Treasurer. Now, Mr. Speaker, when they released their policy, they said, and I quote, "From today, we will be speaking right across the country about the merits of our plan. From today, we'll be speaking right across the country about the merits of the plan." Have we heard much since? We've got the Queensland National Party, Liberal Party conference on the weekend, 173 items, none of them about nuclear power, not about lifting the ban. To be fair, as we know, I like to be fair, there are more important issues. They're debating banning the Aboriginal flag at public events, they're debating selling the ABC, and they're debating getting rid of mandatory medical certificates for elderly drivers. What a forward-looking vision for our country. Warms your heart, Mr. Speaker. But nothing about nuclear, nothing about lifting the ban in Queensland, nothing about energy prices, because this Leader of the Opposition is running a rabble.
Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister still committed to treaty and truth-telling?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you. I thank the Deputy Leader for her question. When it comes to treaty, there are negotiations taking place at the state level, as I've said before. So I refer to those previous answers when once every couple of months this question pops up when they're short of questions in question time, so it pops up. The fact is that those negotiations are at different stages in different states, and that is how treaties are being advanced or not advanced. In Queensland, there were, of course, there was some bipartisanship, and in New South Wales, there is bipartisanship.
Call to the order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the Honourable Member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How have the Albanese Labor government's workplace relations reforms delivered better pay, more job security and closed the gender pay gap after a decade of wages being kept deliberately low?
The call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for Hunter for his question, in particular his commitment for us closing the labour hire loophole and delivering same job, same pay.
The member for Fadden.
I previously referred to the statistics on the three issues the member for Hunter has gone through. Of the 870,000 jobs created under the Albanese Labor government, more than 500,000 of them have been full-time, in a real shift for job security. Wages are now running at 4.1%, whereas they averaged 2.2% under those opposite, and the gender pay gap has never been lower than it is now. But I think to explain the difference that it makes in people's lives, there's nothing stronger than to go to an individual example, and an individual example from a mine worker in the Hunter, a mine worker by the name of Danielle. Now, in mining, when we talk about the labour hire loophole, it's actually one of the ways that the gender pay gap has remained so big in mining, because disproportionately men in the industry have been directly employed and women in the industry have worked through labour hire. So disproportionately you end up with the lower pay scales going to where women are more likely to work. I referred to Danielle in an answer to a question asked by the member for Paterson a few weeks ago. And at that point, the company had announced they were going to employ people directly. We didn't yet know what the pay difference would be for those workers. Well, for Danielle, she has now been given confirmation of what her pay change is as a result of the laws that were changed by this government. $33,000 a year. $33,000 a year for a woman who works driving trucks on a coal mine in the Hunter. $33,000 a year. On top of that, she's also getting a tax cut of $3,700 a year. For workers like Danielle, this is absolutely life-changing. She says herself, and she told me when I called her, she said it brings her a bit closer to reaching her dream of pulling together a deposit and owning her own home. Being paid more is an essential part of housing affordability, an essential part of cost of living. But those opposite, at every opportunity they've had, have wanted people to be taxed more and paid less. On this side, and with this Prime Minister, the Albanese Labor government's making sure for people like Danielle, they are earning more, they are keeping more of what they earn. It is life-changing, but every one of the changes that has made a difference for Danielle has been something that we have had to fight through this parliament, that those opposite have opposed at every single turn. If you support more secure jobs, if you support better pay, if you support closing the gender pay gap, then you have to support the exact laws that those opposite are targeting and wanting to repeal.
Give the call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister guarantee that a government he leads will not make any changes to the tax treatment of residential rental properties?
Call to the Treasurer. Treasurer has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thanks to the member for Hume for his question and his dodgy little prop that he thinks is really clever, that he's waving around in the desperate hope that somebody will notice him up there. But there are no photographers up there, guys.
Order.
There are no photographers up there. And so, as always, you've made a mess of it.
The Treasurer will pause. The member for Grey, no, we're not having any props. The member for Herbert's been trying it on, and the member for Hume. Whatever you're holding up, I can't see it, but it's your iPad. Well, I don't know why you would hold an iPad that way, so just concentrate on the answer. And the member for Barker is definitely not helping his cause. Order. 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 The Treasurer is going. Order. The Treasurer is going to continue with his answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. He can't organise a responsible economic policy, and he can't organise a photographer to take a photo of his dodgy little prop, Mr Speaker. What hope do they have over there, Mr Speaker, when this bloke is the key economic spokesperson for their party?
To the question.
Now, as the Prime Minister made clear yesterday when he was asked a very similar question, our focus when it comes to housing is elsewhere. Our focus is on $32 billion of new investment, including $6 billion in the last budget, to the great credit of the Housing Minister, who fought for and secured a really substantial boost to housing in the budget. So our focus when it comes to housing supply is in new funding in the budget. And when it comes to tax, Mr Speaker, once again, our focus when it comes to tax reform is elsewhere. Our focus in tax reform is multinational tax arrangements. So I shout out the Assistant Minister for introducing the legislation this week to help ensure that multinationals pay their fair share. And I know that this is a long-standing commitment from the Assistant Minister. I pay tribute to him for his work. Our focus when it comes to tax reform is not on the question that we were asked a moment ago. Our focus is on multinationals. Our focus is on build-to-rent, which you voted against. Our focus is on the PRRT that—
The Treasurer will pause. The Leader of the Opposition on his point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, like yesterday, this is a very tight question. Will the Prime Minister guarantee that a government he leads will not make any changes to tax treatment of residential rental properties? Now, the Treasurer has done everything to avoid answering this question, but it is telling that he won't answer it, that the Prime Minister refuses to even make one comment.
Resume your seat. Yeah. You're making a point on relevance. Yep, that's okay. Order. I just require you not to make additional statements as part of the question, right? So we're just going to deal with this point of order, and then I'll call the Leader of the House. So if you could— Yep, you'll get the call straight away.
Well, Mr Speaker, on that basis, I ask that you direct the Minister to be relevant to the question and asked of him, and that is a pretty reasonable request to make.
It is a reasonable request, so I will ask the Treasurer to make sure, and I listened carefully to make sure he's being relevant, and he did specifically say the question I was asked about, and his answer was our focus is not on that, it's on other issues. So I can appreciate the Leader under the standing orders would like a yes or no, rule in, rule out, but as we have gone down this road many times, the Treasurer will need to phrase his answer to make sure he is being order. The Treasurer will need to ensure his answer is directly relevant, and my ruling is to ensure that he is directly relevant. He must be on the topic, and he's got to ensure that he is addressing the question.
Yeah, and I've addressed.
The Treasurer has the call.
I have addressed and am addressing the question, Mr. Speaker, when I say that our focus in tax reform and in housing reform is not on the issues that the Shadow Minister has asked us about.
Order. Members on my left. The member for Hume is warned. He's had a great go this week, so he's not going to be interjecting. I'm not having any of it the last day, okay? The member for Corangamite has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering more support for Australian families who need it most? What approaches have been rejected?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Corangamite for the question and for her tireless advocacy for families in her electorate. Of course, the 1st of July was a very important day for Australian families because it means more cost of living help started to flow for families right across the country. But particularly in the member for Corangamite's electorate, that's 70,000 taxpayers getting a tax cut in Corangamite. Now, from the 1st of July, also in the seat of Corangamite, 2,300 parents are going to benefit from more paid parental leave over the coming year. Now, that is because families are now eligible for an extra 2 weeks of paid parental leave as a result of our government's actions. Now, this means, in terms of helping with the cost of living, families now will receive over $20,000 in help at the time they take off to care for a newborn baby. But, of course, we're not stopping there. We are further expanding the scheme to 26 weeks and will legislate superannuation on top of it. Now, our changes have been widely welcomed by families. This week I had the pleasure of meeting parents and hearing firsthand about our government's changes and what they mean to them. Jenny told me, "We get extra time to adjust of being a family. It's not easy being a new parent. It's also good for mental health and recovering after birth." Steph, mum of Billy, said, "When Billy was born, we got some time off. If we have a second, it will help us exponentially. And in fact, I can share this leave with my husband." Also from Monday, 1.3 million low and middle income families are receiving a boost to their family payment. And every household will receive their power bill cut by $300 and all Australians will benefit from cheaper medicines. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about what approaches have been rejected. And yes, there are some approaches. It's the approach by those opposite when they were last in government. Of course, they cut family payments year on year with indexation freezes. They called mothers taking 2 lots of paid parental leave double dippers, and they tried to cut paid parental leave over and over again. And now they're signalling if they were in government, they'd do it all again, with the member for Hume saying he would cut so-called overspending, so-called unrestrained spending. Well, what does that mean? Cuts to paid parental leave, cuts to family payments. Of course, this will mean families get less support and less help. While Labor stands up for working families, those opposite are planning how they're going to cut and foist risky, expensive nuclear reactors onto us all. It is only our government, a Labor government, that will stand up for families and do the right thing.
The call to the honourable member for Lyne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister guarantee that a government that he leads will not make any changes to the tax treatment of the tradie work ute? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Any changes to the fringe benefit tax treatment of the work ute?
To assist the House, because I think the member may have missed a part of the question. To order, members on my right. Order. I'm just going to ask the member to do the question again because I couldn't hear what he was saying. So, Prime Minister will order. No, everyone's entitled to a fair go when people are asking their questions. Okay? That's to everyone in the chamber. So the member for Lyne is entitled to ask a question. He's going to ask his question.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister guarantee millions of Australian tradies that a government he leads will not make any changes to the fringe benefits tax treatment of the tradies' work ute? You know, utility vehicle.
Order. No, members on my right. No, members on my right. Order. Order. The laughing can cease immediately. Order. Order. The member for Groom is not helping. The member for Petrie. When the House comes to order, the member for Lyne's asked his question. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, he had 3 cracks and I'm still not sure what the question was. Let me just say this.
Order.
Let me just say this. The member should ask about what we are doing, not what we aren't doing. And what we are doing is bringing forward legislation before this parliament across a range of measures. Most importantly, the legislation that gave every one of the taxpayers in Lyne a tax cut on Monday. Legislation that the member for Lyne was a part of an operation that said that they would oppose it before they knew what it was, and then said they'd roll it back, and then said we should have an election over it.
Does the Prime Minister conclude his answer? Yeah. To give the call to the honourable member for Paterson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese? When you finish,
Order,
gents.
no.
Sorry.
The member will resume her seat. No, order. Members on my right. The member for O'Connor was interjecting during that question. He will leave the chamber under 94A. We've just had an example of the member for Lyne asking a question that I wanted to show with respect. The same courtesy is going to be shown to the member for Paterson. Okay? Member Paterson has the call, and we'll begin her question again.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to invest in public education and support Australian workers? And what approaches has the government ruled out?
Give a call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the legendary member for Paterson, for her question. Mr Speaker, the Liberal Party ripped billions of dollars out of public schools and we're putting billions of dollars back in. And on top of that, we're also funding capital works upgrades for public schools that sometimes haven't got them for years and years. For example, in the legendary member for Paterson's electorate, we're upgrading the outdoor learning area at Rutherford Public School. In my friend the member for Chifley's electorate, we're installing air conditioning and upgrading classrooms at Chifley College. In the member for Flynn's electorate, we're building new classrooms at Warrabinda State School. And in the member for Braddon's electorate, new classrooms at Parklands High School in Mighty Burney. And they're just a couple of examples. This year, the government is funding more than $215 million in capital works upgrades to public schools right across the country. Most of them in regional Australia and in the outer suburbs of our big cities. And all of them require plumbers and electricians and carpenters and other tradies. And all of them, as we know, got a tax cut this week. A plumber helping to install a new toilet block on 90 grand got a tax cut this week of almost $2,000. A chippy working on one of these projects on 100 grand got a tax cut this week of more than $2,000. And an electrician installing new lighting on 110 grand on one of these projects got a tax cut this week of more than $2,500. And that's real cost of living relief. Tax cuts for every taxpayer, not just tradies, truckies as well, teachers, nurses, childcare workers, everyone. Well, almost everyone. There is one group of Australians who missed out, who didn't get a tax cut this week, and that's those hard-working Aussies who work to keep our nation's small modular nuclear reactors working. And that's not because they don't deserve it, it's because they don't exist. Not here, not anywhere, except Russia, perhaps, which incidentally is where the opposition leader's economic policies come from. Howard and Costello replaced by hammer and sickle. Mr. Speaker, we're cutting taxes and building classrooms. On the other side, what do they want to do? Shut supermarkets and build Soviet-style nuclear reactors. The party of the forgotten people has forgotten who they are.
Yeah. Give the call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Regional universities, including those in Indi, rely on international student revenue to educate the nurses, teachers and doctors of the future. Universities Australia and the Regional Universities Network are warning that any reduction in revenue would result in job cuts and the closure of regional campuses. Why is this government moving ahead with changes that undermine the ability of regional universities to educate the workforce that we need?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the member for Indi for her question, her passion, her interest in this area. I know she's a champion of regional universities, like she's a passionate supporter of our regions generally. Let me tell you that this is about supporting our regional universities and supporting international education. It's about making sure that we protect the integrity of the system that we have and making sure that we provide certainty and stability for the future. International education, I'm sure you'd agree, I'm sure all members of the House would agree, is an important national asset. This is the biggest export that we don't dig out of the ground, makes us money in the cities and in the regions, creates jobs, and you touched on that in your question. But it also does something else. It makes us friends, because when people come to Australia and study and they fall in love with this great country, then they take that love and affection back home with them. So it's important. But as I said, we've got to protect the integrity of this system and its social licence to operate. Students have come back since the pandemic, but so have the shonks, the people that seek to undermine the integrity of the system. And I know that you understand that. We had a yak about this yesterday, and I know that you support the integrity measures that are part of this bill. What the bill also does is set levels or limits for individual universities, and my department is working with organisations like UA and RUN, universities right across the board, on what those levels should be. I'm also consulting directly with universities to make sure that we get this right, but it's about making sure that we provide universities with certainty and stability for managed growth over time. I should point you to some of the positive comments that have been made, for example, by La Trobe University. I know that they work in your part of Australia. They've welcomed the certainty that this framework could provide. I should point to the comments that the Chancellor of the University of Queensland has made in support of this legislation, Peter Varghese, a man who has the respect, I think, of all members of this House. In addition to that, the Australian Technology Network of Universities that represents Deakin, RMIT, also Newcastle University, Curtin, UTS and University of South Australia indicated their support. But I want to make sure I get this right. And I know that you've identified concerns with the bill. So have other members of the crossbench. I'm keen to work with you, keen to work with senators on this bill to make sure that we get it right, to make sure that we set our universities and our other tertiary education providers who educate not just Australians but people from overseas, to make sure that we set this important industry up for the future.
Give a call to the honourable member for Bean.
Thanks, Speaker.
My question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. What benefits will NDIS workers begin to receive this week? What are the risks of delaying the passage of Labor's legislation to reform the NDIS and ensure its ongoing sustainability? And what will be the cost to the Australian taxpayer?
Call to the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Services Australia.
Thank the member for Bean for his question. There's 5 bits of good news for disability workers, the 400,000 people who work in the NDIS and to whom I'd like to acknowledge their great work. First of all 400,000 are getting a tax cut. Great. For all of those on the award, which is most of them, they've had a 15% increase in wages since Labor got elected. That's good. They're going to access cheaper medicines. That's got to be a plus. Their superannuation's gone up. Great. And, of course, they're getting energy relief. So that's 5 bits of good news for people who do a brilliant job. But there are problems. There are problems about the sustainability of the scheme, which undermines all the good work all these good people do.
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
What we see is that
the
NDIS is growing, but it's growing too fast. And I know members of the opposition understand that. They just couldn't do anything about it, but they know that problem. Now, the issue is it is growing too fast. So Labor has some propositions to help restrain the rate of growth. We've got a bill in the parliament. The Senate's had it for 12 weeks. They've had it for 12 weeks. They've had it for 12 weeks. The problem is they want to now delay it for another 8 weeks. And this is the problem. Because sometimes you can delay things in the Senate and really the sun comes up the next day and the chicken still lays eggs. But sometimes things get delayed in the Senate, which has a cost. This legislation, if it's delayed, is, according to the Actuary, going to cost people on the scheme, and it's going to cost taxpayers $1 billion in waste. $1 billion. $1 billion. Now, the reason why it's going to cost $1 billion, is because the Liberals need more time to ask questions. But I want to put to the House and the backbench of the coalition, who don't always get to hear what's going on, these are the questions which your senators need 8 weeks to answer. And I think even the group opposite could answer this in quicker than 8 weeks.
Order.
Do you think it is right that people can claim tarot cards and clairvoyance on the scheme? You don't need 8 weeks to work that out. Do you think that it should take 8 weeks to work out if people should be able to get cuddle therapy? Of course you don't. But for whatever reason, you are taking 8 weeks and $1 billion to answer obvious questions.
The Assistant Treasurer is warned. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Well, on a point of order, Mr Speaker, it's on relevance. It's an obvious point of order because don't forget that this minister is the architect of the scheme. How can he be?
Resume your seat. Order. Order before the minister continues. That was an abuse. Look, the problem with that, Leader of the Opposition, is an abuse of the process of the point of order. So if it was anyone else, action would be taken. We can't. The member for Forrest, whoever was interjecting, just while I'm addressing the House and dealing with the point of order, to abuse the point of order process goes down a very bad path. I don't want that to happen in question time, or to continue. The Leader of the Opposition has raised his point of order. Order. The Leader of the Nationals, the Minister, has 26 seconds remaining.
To be fair, I don't think cuddle therapy should be on the NDIS, but I think someone should give the Leader of an Opposition a cuddle after the week he's had. The fact of the matter is, and I just say this once, there's $1 billion being wasted. Participants on the scheme, 60,000 kids could get a year's support. Why are you so oxygenally, stealingly dumb to waste time on $1 billion? Shame on all of you.
The minister's time has expired. Order. When the House comes to order, I'd like to hear from the member for Hughes.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. On the 9th of November 2020, in this place, the Prime Minister said the voice must be followed by truth-telling, because until we acknowledge the reality of our history, we are shackled to its demons. And truth must be followed by a Makarrata Commission. Makarrata is about conflict resolution, justice and, crucially, self-determination. It's a path to a national treaty. Is this still the Prime Minister's position?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
The member for Hughes has answered her own question in the nature of the question and the words that were there.
The call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Speaker.
Order. The House will come to order. The member for Tangney will be shown the same courtesy as every other member today. The member for Herbert will leave the chamber under 94A. When I'm talking about courtesy, that is not the time to interject. Okay? The member for Tangney has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. How is Labor's Home for Australia plan helping address housing affordability, and what is standing in its way?
The call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank our terrific member for Tangney. And the member for Tangney would know that 87,000 people in his electorate this week got a tax cut to help them with the cost of living. But obviously he knows, of course, housing affordability is a serious issue in his electorate and indeed around the country after what we inherited from those opposite when it comes to the housing challenges, Mr Speaker. We need to build more homes in Australia. We don't have enough homes, and we haven't had enough homes for a long time because of what we inherited from those opposite. That's why, of course, we have a national housing target to build 1.2 million homes by the end of the decade. And we've backed up this ambitious target with $32 billion in new housing initiatives from the federal government, on top of what the states and territories are doing, Mr Speaker. This $32 billion Homes for Australia plan will help us train more tradies, turbocharge construction and streamline planning to build the homes that Australia needs. Indeed, we're working with all the tiers of government, Mr Speaker, some of the local government people that are here today, the state government, the construction sector and the community housing sector to meet this shared national target.
Members on my left.
We all have to have our shoulder to the wheel, Mr Speaker, if we're going to achieve this target. It is ambitious, but we need to be ambitious to turn around the housing challenges, Mr Speaker, and we know that boosting supply is the answer to this. Indeed, our historic National Cabinet meeting in August last year made some decisions around planning and zoning and reforms that will help with that. The independent analysis of our supply plan by the Grattan Institute found that it would put significant downward pressure on rents that could save renters $32 billion in payments when it comes to rents. And that's, Mr Speaker, how you deliver real cost of living relief, not by pushing up energy prices with risky nuclear reactors. And it's also not by blocking housing legislation in the parliament. And what have we seen again in the last week or so, Mr Speaker? We've seen those opposite, with their friends in the Greens political party, block yet more housing in the Senate. Indeed, they want to block homes of every kind, social and affordable homes, when those opposite blocked the Housing Australia Future Fund and delayed it with the help of the Greens for months. We could have homes under construction today under the Housing Australia Future Fund if it wasn't for those opposite with the Greens. And indeed, of course, they want to block our Help to Buy scheme. As the Prime Minister said today, of course, we've got from the Queensland LNP support for a shared equity scheme, but we've also had it from the Liberal state premiers in Tasmania and the former Liberal Premier in New South Wales, who all support shared equity schemes. But apparently those opposite don't support shared equity anymore, Mr Speaker. We want to build more homes for people to buy, more homes for people to rent and more homes for Australians that need a safe place each night.
Give the call to order. Give the call to the honourable member for Griffith.
The Prime Minister, the Greens will pass your plan, build-to-rent plan, if Labor guarantees in law that 100% of the apartments built under this scheme are genuinely affordable. But an analysis of build-to-rent projects in Sydney found that rents for a two-bedroom apartment were 27% above market rent, which means a two-bedroom apartment in Marrickville under Labor's scheme could be over $1,000 extra a week in rent. Will Labor work with the Greens to ensure tax handouts don't go to developers to build apartments no one can afford?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, the Greens political party, of course, did vote with the Coalition to delay the Housing Australia Future Fund, and they did vote with the Coalition to block build-to-rent just in the last fortnight. That would have 160,000 new affordable rental homes as a result, and they voted against it. I mean, if the Leader of the Opposition votes with the Greens any more times, he's going to have to get a hyphen in his surname. I mean, it just keeps going. It just keeps going. Where you guys over in the Senate block, build to rent, delayed Housing Australia Future Fund, and you voted with the Coalition for help to buy, to block help to buy as well, which is sitting in the Senate as well. And of course, one of my local members in Grainler has claimed, going forward with the Minns Labor government's efforts to build more housing in Sydney, the Greens member for Balmain is out there saying it's building more homes is unlikely to have a meaningful impact on the housing price. I mean, it is unbelievable that they oppose every single measure. And indeed, the member for Griffith is supporting a campaign against new homes. He claimed on Insiders, he said there's planning changes that allow more housing won't change a thing. He went on to say that won't change a thing because what we know right now is that the planning system is not the barrier to fixing the housing crisis. Well, I'll tell you what, Mr Speaker, when you look at each of the states and all of our capital cities, we know that planning is a big problem. But of course, one of his colleagues who's not here today, of course, has opposed an apartment building in his inner-city electorate, the member for Brisbane, because it would, to quote him, would have a substantive impact on the views of existing nearby residents. Then there's another development that would turn an empty sand and gravel factory into 381 apartments because there would be too many car parks associated with it. He is also concerned that the height of the building would impact the unique character of this heritage neighbourhood. And of course, the member for Brisbane, of course, the justification for opposing this very sensible build-to-rent scheme is that developers would build the buildings. That's what they put in their media release, Mr Speaker.
Order. Give a call to the member for McEwen.
My question is the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government Territories. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support local government? How is this different from other approaches?
The call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for McEwen for his question and note that because of his advocacy, 76,000 taxpayers in his electorate will be getting a tax cut. And a massive thank you to him for taking me in his electorate where we met with Macedon Ranges Council to see the work that they're doing for their communities. Mr Speaker, Labor's new tax cuts have benefited every working Australian, from local government workers in our biggest cities to those who work in the most remote parts of Australia. There are 546 councils across our country. They employ almost 200,000 people across 400 different occupations, local governments that support communities in every part of our nation. And this week, nearly 1,200 delegates from the local government sector have descended upon Canberra for their National General Assembly. And tomorrow, over 800 of those delegates will hear from government ministers at the Australian Council of Local Governments. This week I'll be meeting with close to 39 local councils who have told me about some of the challenges facing their communities. And from this week, people across regional Australia have seen an increase in their pay packets, because on this side of the House we believe that people should earn more and keep more of what they earn. And Labor's tax cuts will see a water and sewer apprentice working in the Hunter receive an additional $1,179 in their annual salary. On Christmas Island, one of our most remote local governments off the coast of WA, a recreational services manager earning $100,000 will see a tax cut of $2,179. Is the message from those opposite that they do not support hard-working council officers earning more and keeping more of what they earn? Because on this side of the House we value what they do. We acknowledge their vital contribution to our communities and we thank them for it. That is a very stark difference from those opposite, who froze indexation on financial assistance grants for 3 years, which has had a substantial impact on local councils' budgets, it's had a substantial impact on the maintenance of council assets, and it's had a substantial impact on what communities can expect from their local councils. Labor's new plan is delivering tax cuts for every Australian. It's helping local councils put more money in the pockets of their workers. That's how you deliver real cost of living relief, not a risky, expensive nuclear reactor plan. Can I acknowledge all of the councillors and the mayors and the CEOs who have come into this building this week and engaged with all members of this place, including the government, and say a big thank you for the work that you do on behalf of communities right across this country.
Yeah. Give the call to the member for Menzies.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, this week iconic Australian businessman Dick Smith has placed advertisements in national papers stating the following: no other country has or is planning to operate their energy systems entirely on wind, solar and storage. Why is the Prime Minister letting his ideological obsession get in the way of letting Australia join the rest of the world in adopting clean, cheap and reliable nuclear power?
Order. Order. Members on my right. The member for Fremantle is warned. Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Menzies for his question, but of course our intention isn't to have 100% renewables either. We know that firming capacity
the member for Fairfax. Order. No. The member for Fairfax. Order. The Treasurer. I'm dealing with matters before the House. The member for Fairfax sits right near me. He definitely doesn't need to have that decibel. So he's been interjecting all throughout the week. So he's going to remain here, but he's got order. No, we're going to put him on a warning. You're on a warning, and that means, like the member for Hume, who's also on a warning. Yeah, and we're going to hear from the Prime Minister in silence.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm pro-compassion, Mr Speaker. Pro-compassion. The fact is that we understand that gas, for example, plays an important role in firming up renewables. I know Dick Smith. I like Dick Smith. He's a good fella. He's a good fella and he's made a great contribution to Australia. But of course, what he knows is that for longer than he's been on this earth, I think, the coalition have been promising nuclear reactors since 1952. 1952. That's when the South Australian Liberal Premier said a nuclear plant could be developed here in the next 10 years. And then we get to 1969, where John Gorton said, "We shall, during the next parliament, take Australia into the atomic age by beginning the construction of an atomic plant at Jervis Bay to generate electricity."
Aren't you supposed to be the future king?
The Illawarra Mercury reported then in 1970 that the Jervis Bay plant would be the first of 20 atomic plants, costing more than $2 billion to be built in Australia by 1990. Now, their idea of facing the future is moving on from Menzies to Gorton. from Menzies to Gorton. The Liberals have been so obsessed with the nukes that the only costings we have are in pounds, shillings and pence, because we haven't got anything else from this mob. We haven't got anything else in all that time. You wouldn't think that nuclear reactors and supermarkets have much in common, Mr Speaker. But let me tell you what they have in common is that they are both shambles from those opposite. Both of them are causing divisions from those opposite, including, of course, when they're all at the Queensland LNP conference on the weekend. There'll be no mention. Nuclear will be the word that dare not speak its name. Dare not speak its name. We know as well that both of them are the case of the Nats being pretty happy about how it's all going, the economic policy led by the National Party, who, to be fair, have always had a touch of socialism about them, a touch of government intervention. But for the party that used to talk about markets and used to talk about business, they have strayed so far away from it. They're opposing measures that were there in the budget. The truth is that both of these things will be bigger power bills, bigger grocery bills, and every time this bloke has a thought, Australians would end up paying more.
Prime Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the order. Give the call to the member for McNamara.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to strengthen Medicare and make medicines cheaper? And how does this compare to the past decade of cuts and neglect?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for McNamara for his question. He's a great local member, Mr Speaker, and a fierce advocate for better healthcare services in his electorate in South Melbourne. He also understands the deep contrast between our record in just 2 years of strengthening Medicare and the sorry record of those opposite over a decade of cuts and neglect, which of course all began with the Leader of the Opposition's horror health budget in 2014. But the member for McNamara nonetheless asks me for a comparison. Well, Mr Speaker, we've put an additional $13 billion on the table to provide more support for our hard-working public hospitals. We know they're under pressure, Mr Speaker, and we want to provide them with more help. By contrast, the Leader of the Opposition tried to cut $50 billion from public hospitals when he was the Health Minister. On this side, we've tripled the bulk billing incentive for GP visits, Mr Speaker, something the College of GPs called a game-changer. In just the month of May alone, that delivered an additional 900,000 free visits to the doctor, Mr Speaker. Well, what did they do? Well, of course, the Leader of the Opposition tried to abolish bulk billing altogether, Mr Speaker. He'd said there were too many free Medicare services, and you wonder why bulk billing was in freefall when we came to government, Mr Speaker. On this side, we've rolled out dozens of Medicare urgent care clinics. They're open 7 days a week, extended hours, available to walk-in patients, and importantly, they are fully bulk billed, Mr Speaker. The member for McNamara and I recently visited one in his electorate, the South Melbourne Urgent Care Clinic. It's already seen more than 16,000 patients, delivering terrific care and taking pressure off the ED at the Alfred Hospital across the road. On that side, what new models of care did they deliver in 9 years? Absolutely nothing, Mr Speaker. And of course, we've made medicines cheaper for pensioners, cheaper for concession card holders, cheaper for general patients, already saving patients more than $400 million, Mr Speaker. A few weeks ago, the member for McNamara and I visited a terrific pharmacy, the Laird's Pharmacy at Elwood, and spoke to Elizabeth Fu there about her beautiful service there in Elwood. We also talked to her about our latest measure to make medicines cheaper, freezing the price of PBS scripts by up to 5 years, Mr Speaker. And what did he do? Well, he tried to make medicines more expensive by jacking up the price of scripts by up to $5, Mr Speaker. So I say, at the end of this parliamentary session, let's compare the pair. On this side, a hard-working government trying to strengthen Medicare. On that side, a Leader of the Opposition who's only ever tried to wreck it.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order.